The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hi, welcome to a discussion with Victoria Moran. I'm Eileen Cavanaugh from the Hennepin County Library Program Office, and my guest today, Victoria Moran, is the author of The Love Powered Diet, and a book we'll be discussing today, Get the Fat Out, 501 Simple Ways to Cut the Fat in Any Diet. Welcome, Victoria.
Thank you.
I should say welcome back because you were on our series a couple of years ago talking about the Love Powered Diet. And now we'll be talking about something that's on everybody's mind these days, either cutting down the fat in one's diet or getting rid of it pretty much entirely. This is a great, great book because it's filled with, as it says, 501 tips, but also some recipes and some ideas of what kind of equipment you might need, and just in general, everything you need to know if you want to cut the fat out in your diet.
That was what I tried to do.
And you did it successfully, I would say.
Thank you.
I turned first of all to the restaurant eating out portion of the book because that's where I really find it hard to cut the fat out. For one reason, I don't always know how they've prepared it. And the second reason, I guess, is that I think in lower cost restaurants, I suspect you're inclined to get more fat in your food.
I think that's true, but there are a couple of points here. First, if you're eating low fat at home and really being consistent, and you go out, you do the best you can. One of the examples that I give in the book is you can go to an Italian restaurant and order a pasta with marinara sauce. That should be very, very low in fat. But I have ordered that very dish, and the marinara sauce has oil around the edges. It looks like it's swimming in oil. So I have called the waiter over, and he will say, "But madame, that is not fat, that is olive oil." So you have an option. You can send it back or just say, "Thank you, thanks for the education," and eat it.
And once is not going to.
That's it. Once is not going to be a problem. Ethnic restaurants are wonderful, generally Italian, Vietnamese, Chinese. I know there was some press in the fall of 1993 that Kung Pao chicken was worse than a double cheeseburger, but you have to know how to order in any restaurant, just like at home. If you get a meal that's based around grains and vegetables, then you'll probably be okay.
And you mentioned an interesting thing that I hadn't thought of in restaurant eating, that you can order the regular meal and just not take the meat portion if that's the fat-bearing portion.
You can do that, or if you want a meat entree, you want to make sure that it's prepared without added fats and oils. Certainly you want to say nothing fried. And so often we think that restaurant menus are etched in granite. If it says we have fried fish, they could also broil that fish or grill it in some way with little or no oil. You just have to ask.
And you also put in a nice little suggestion that where a waiter has done something special to accommodate you, it might be nice to leave an extra tip.
Oh, it is. I think especially if you are just ordering some side vegetables and putting a meal together from appetizers so that your overall bill is going to be lower priced. You don't want your waiter to get 15% of not very much.
The next thing I looked at was the dessert section because because I find it hard to do without desserts, and those are almost synonymous in my mind with fat and high calories. So I made a dessert.
And it looks fabulous.
And this is a very high calorie dessert, and I just wanted to talk about the ingredients because all of the ingredients were brought about by tips that were from your book. This is a recipe that called for a graham cracker crust.
Which would have butter or
Which would have butter and sugar. And instead, this is grape nuts, and it has fruit concentrate to hold it together. Now, I was really surprised. I wondered if that would work, but the fruit concentrate really does hold it together just like, and it looks like a graham cracker crust. And the middle section is cream cheese and powdered sugar and whipped topping and peanut butter. And all of these, I just newly found low-fat peanut butter. Cream cheese, of course, comes no fat now. And the Cool Whip comes in a Cool Whip Light. And that wonderful-looking hot fudge is a hot fudge that you suggested by brand in your book. It's called Waxworks, is it?
Wax Orchards.
Wax Orchards.
Yes.
Hot fudge. It's sweetened with
Fruit concentrates.
instead of sugar.
Yes.
And
no fat.
And it only has, I think, 16 calories per teaspoonful.
Yeah, it's very lean. The interesting thing about chocolate, most people think, oh, chocolate, not only is it high in fat, but it's saturated fat. It's the kind that likes to get in there and cause cholesterol production and do terrible things to the arteries. But the fat in chocolate is in the cocoa butter, not in the cocoa powder. So you can use cocoa powder to make puddings and cakes and other things at home. And some of the companies like Wax Orchards are making fudge sauces that are real chocolate but low in fat.
And it really is, it's wonderful. It tastes every bit as good as the
Well,
regular
I
stuff.
commend you on this piece of cheesecake. Is that what we're calling this?
Well, it's sort of a high-calorie dessert. Yeah, sort of a faux cheesecake, I guess.
Well, it's wonderful. It looks great.
But I thought it was fun to know that you can just take your ordinary recipes because of all the new products we have out now. And I found this every bit as satisfying as the original recipe.
Do we get to eat it after this taping?
Indeed. We'll auction it off.
Oh.
I tried the recipes and to really go no fat for about 10 days. And I found that I sort of felt lighter and better. Is this an experience that people tell you about often? Or obviously you've been using a no-fat diet, so.
I think for me it's been gradual, so I haven't particularly noticed a feeling of lightness. Certainly people do get lighter. People who need to lose some weight shed it very, very easily by taking the fat or a great deal of the fat out of their diets without noticing it, without noticing that they're not dieting anymore. I think it's very dangerous. We're learning to go on a diet, to cut back on calories, because then when you start to eat in any normal sort of way again, the body thinks there's been a famine and wants to hold on to every little calorie it gets. But with low-fat eating, you just change the configuration of your meals so you're eating larger quantities of grains and vegetables that stay with you, and then lighter portions, smaller portions of the heavier, higher fat foods, so you're still eating enough to feel really satisfied.
I noticed you talked about rice as one of those filling foods.
Well, rice is a staple for most of the world. I've traveled a lot in China and other parts of Asia, and rice is eaten all the time, daily. In fact, when a Chinese person greets you, he might say something that translates as hello, or he might say something that translates as have you eaten rice today?
Just as a gentle reminder.
Yes, and there aren't fat people in China.
And I also noticed that you use herbs a lot, herbs and spices in rice to vary it and give it some flavor that perhaps is missing.
You can do wonderful things with rice. You can cook it, instead of using water, using half and half apple juice and water. So it gives it a little sweetness. You can use celery juice, which gives it a saltiness without using added sodium. You can put plumped raisins or pieces of pineapple in rice to give it a moistness. These are the kinds of things you learn when you start to cut the fat in your diet. Fat does two things. One is that it carries flavor. So you want to make sure that the food that you're eating has a lot of flavor itself. And the other thing that fat does is give a moistness. So you want to provide that in other ways, like the pineapple and the raisins and the rice. Just something to give that little bit more moist mouthfeel.
And one of the substitutes you talked about that was intriguing to me is to say that you could use baby food prunes in place of fat in brownies or other kinds of cooking where you wouldn't notice where the flavor would be covered up.
Yes, the idea of using prune paste for up to 75% of the oil or shortening in a baked dish has been in the Washington Post. It's pretty much been around. It's not the easiest thing on earth to make. I do tell in Get the Fat Out how you can make prune paste. Prune baby food works, and I have heard that there is now a prune paste available commercially. People perhaps could look for that in the supermarket. You can also use applesauce in place of all of the oil or shortening in baking.
Well, that sort of brings us to the grocery store. One of the great things that I've noticed since I read your book is how many products now come in either reduced fat or fat-free alternatives. And one of the things I noticed is that particularly salad dressings and frozen yogurts have just as good a taste without the fat as they do with.
Oh, I think many of them do, and it's fun to experiment. The one warning I would suggest to anybody that's going to the store and just saying, oh, this says fat-free, this says fat-reduced, and taking that home, is that just because something has less fat doesn't necessarily mean that it's really healthy, that it's really going to be the best thing for your body. If that label has chemical ingredients on it, 15 letters long, that you need some kind of degree in chemistry to decipher, or if there's a lot of sodium, you might want to avoid those particular products. I have noticed that some of the commercial lower fat products seem to replace that with more sodium, which for some people can be a problem.
Carrying the flavor again with
Yes.
the salt rather than the fat. Well, and obviously you can't eat twice as much of the low-fat product to you're back where you were to start with. I also noticed in one of the restaurants that's near our place of work here that they have added a new alternatives menu in which they have radically low-fat things like low-calorie bread dipped in egg white and with low-calorie syrup, and makes rather a satisfying breakfast. That's
For me, I honestly must say that would be going too far. I don't see a reason for low-calorie bread when bread is a wonderful, substantial, high complex carbohydrate if you're using a whole grain bread by itself. A low-calorie syrup probably has artificial sweetener. I'd rather go with real maple syrup from the trees in Vermont, and none of these things has fat. They're concentrated, so you don't want to eat buckets full, but since nobody can afford buckets full of real maple syrup anyway, that moderation is built in with the price.
So what you're saying is that you need to balance the healthy food with the low fat.
Oh, absolutely. A study came out in the early spring of 1994 suggesting that Americans have been eating less fat and less cholesterol, and yet tend to be fatter than they were 20 years ago. So this is an interesting paradox. How could this be? So I spoke with a lot of the doctors and the researchers that I know from being a health writer, and to get their take on how that could be, and they told me a couple of things. One is that when people reduce their fat, they're really not reducing it enough. They're reducing it perhaps from 40% to 30%, which is what the American Heart Association has for its maximum. But a great deal of literature says that we need to be eating a lot less fat than that. And in addition, when people are eating less fat, but they're not really eating satisfying foods, they're not eating these complex carbohydrates, natural kinds of foods that are giving the body what it needs, they're going to keep craving more food and grab a few chips here and something else there that's not so good.
What amount of fat does a person who is not overweight need?
It really doesn't matter whether a person is overweight or not, because the fat that collects on the arteries is more important than the fat that collects on the waistline. As I said, the American Heart Association recommendation is not more than 30%, but the work of Dr. Dean Ornish in California has shown that to actually reverse atherosclerotic plaque in the arteries requires a diet much, much lower in fat, around 10%. Now, what Dr. Ornish says is that you really can't know whether you're the sort of person who can do all right on 30% fat or if you need to go lower. And since the first sign of atherosclerosis is often a heart attack and sudden death, it's better to cover your bases and really keep it low.
So this is a preventive sort of thing.
Preventive as well as, what's the opposite of
As
preventive?
well as healthful.
Yes, you can turn around disease eating in this way, many studies show, as well as preventing disease.
Okay. So the person who's had a problem already can sort of reverse the...
Right. Now for me, not being a mathematical person, you could ask me at any point in my life, what percentage of calories from fat are you consuming? And I would say, duh, because it's just not the sort of thing that people think about. We just don't know, and unless you want to carry a calculator around all the time, I don't see how anyone can really eat by number. So what I suggest is that people base their diets around grains, legumes, vegetables, and fruits. These are fat-free virtually. All food has some fat in it. And that keeps the base of your diet, the staples, really low. And then whatever else you choose to add to that is your prerogative. I think we think in terms of entrees as, well, are we going to have beef, chicken, or fish? But if we think in terms of, are we going to base this meal on rice, potatoes, or pasta, and then add the other foods to that, you get the right configuration and you don't need your calculator.
And it makes life a little less problematical.
Oh, and a little less clinical.
Yes. One of the nice things about your book is that you offer transitional tips from people who perhaps have been eating 30 to 50% fat in their diet and don't want to drop down to nothing cold turkey, but want to do some traditional things. And you make the point that one ought to affirm oneself for making some efforts along the line, even if you're not making that total effort.
Oh, absolutely. That's why I'm really excited about Get the Fat Out, because it's tips. These are just tips. You can open it to the middle and say, oh, I can do that, I can do that. And it doesn't matter. Maybe all you want to do is stop using butter on bread and you want to do something else. Great. And then you might want to do something else next month.
Is the goal of getting the fat out to be a vegetarian?
If a person is ill with heart disease, let us say, a program like the Ornish program does require all of its participants to be on a strictly vegetarian diet. It requires some other things, meditation, exercise, yoga. That's quite a commitment for most people. I think if we can keep in mind that vegetarians have always been known for their low blood pressure, their low cholesterol levels, their longevity and general health, we know that going in that direction is good for anyone. I don't think it has ever been shown that it is necessary to absolutely never eat meat or fish again. Obviously, the Pritikin program is very successful. It's very low in fat, and the people on that eat, I think it's 3 ounces of lean meat a day. So there are all sorts of ways to look at it. Many people prefer to be complete vegetarians because it's easier, because they can eat large quantities of foods and not have to worry about, is this 3 ounces? But not everyone is going to become a vegetarian, and that's certainly not required. There are tips in Get the Fat Out, like it says in the subtitle, for any diet.
And there are tips to use meat and fish as well as to eliminate it entirely from your diet, which is nice. It's a very flexible book.
Well, you have to be. You know, we all are coming from different culinary backgrounds. One of the dietitians that I interviewed for this book told me how she has learned from her clients that she works in a Hispanic area and learned how much calcium is in corn tortillas, which was something that she just didn't know in all of her education. They'd always said dairy products, leafy greens. So we learn every day.
I've noticed on a lot of news spots when they're talking about reducing fat that they warn parents that this does not apply to children. And I think they're saying that children need 50% fat in their diet.
This is children up to the age of 2, which is quite young.
Yes.
After the age of 2, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, children should be on the same low-fat diet that is recommended for adults by the American Heart Association, with that 30% ceiling.
So we're really talking about infants, not children.
Really, toddlers, very small children. In fact, there's someone that you can interview at a later date, perhaps. Dr. Charles Atwood has a wonderful book called Dr. Atwood's Low-Fat Prescription for Children. I know that book because I contributed a chapter from the ranks as a mother of a child eating in this way. And Dr. Spock wrote the introduction to that book. So there is a lot of interest in preventing adult diseases where they start. We found during the Korean War that American GIs had clogged arteries when they were 19 and 20 years old. So that had to start in childhood.
One thing that you mentioned that we need to relearn is our grocery shopping, our looking at, and we alluded to that a little bit before, but can you tell us more about how to grocery shop through labels if you want to reduce the fat in your diet?
Sure. The best foods to choose in the grocery store are those that don't even have labels, meaning the fresh produce and the whole grains. If you have a store where you can get things in bulk, you save money that way as well. So you want to hit the produce section. You want to go where you can get whole grain breads, whole grain cereals, rice, pasta. You can bypass whole aisles, so it makes it a very quick trip. And the fact is, there are many foods that are fat-free that you might want to consider having in not such great quantity. Soda pop, for example. It has no fat, but it's probably not the best thing to put in your body or into your children's. So if you think about food that grows up out of the ground, the kind of food that your grandparents ate, you're probably better off.
Now, what about the mom who's used to making that ham and cheese sandwich in the brown bag lunch?
Brown bag lunches are not terribly difficult, but you really have to do a rethink up here. Vegetable sandwiches are wonderful. They have them in Britain. They call them salad sandwiches. You can get them anywhere. And I think the best way to interest someone in a veggie sandwich is to take them out to a sub shop and get a veggie sub. You can get a veggie sub without the cheese on it, which is high in fat. It's a wonderful kind of sandwich if you really want to keep the fat at rock bottom. Of course, you could put some lean turkey or some sort of a vegetarian cold cut that's low fat on there as well. But if you just want to stick with vegetables, you can do that. You can also put soup, wonderful thick soups. You can thicken a soup with potatoes or with a little flour and put that in a thermos. There are low-fat yogurts, all kinds of wonderful salads and fruit salads. Fruit, and you always want to put a little treat of some sort, some kind of cookie or something, and a nice note saying, "Mom's thinking about you."
How nice, how nice. Besides going to the grocery store and shopping, you've given some tips for some kitchen appliances that might be helpful.
Well, if you have a deep fryer, it's going to be difficult to have a low-fat diet. You want to make it as easy for yourself to eat the new way and as difficult for yourself to revert back to the old way as possible.
So throw out the deep fryer.
Or anything that makes it more difficult to eat this way. You'll really want to have a good non-stick pan, not one that if you scrape it with a fork, the Teflon comes off. A really good pan that has a lifetime guarantee. Another thing that you'll want is a blender, and hopefully a food processor as well, because there are lots of wonderful gravies and sauces. There are whipped creams without cream, wonderful things that you can mix if you have one of these appliances.
Well, and some of the stuff that we haven't talked about really, but I think is important, is the psychology of it, the nice fruit platter or vegetable platter that looks really nice the way a food processor can make it look. And as we talked about earlier, I thought it was psychological largely that grape nuts looked like a graham cracker crust to me, so in my mind it almost translated that it was.
That's real important.
Does getting the fat out mean I have to give out all my die for a chocolate dessert?
Well, we touched on chocolate earlier. As long as you're not having the cocoa butter and just using the cocoa powder, you can use chocolate. And some people like carob as well. Carob, which is something you can get at the health food store. It's the locust bean. It looks like chocolate. I think it tastes like chocolate. A real chocolate connoisseur might not think that. But it's naturally sweet. So when you're using cocoa powder, you do have to sweeten it to get that bitter edge off. But with carob, you can use it just the way it comes, and it's actually quite nutritious, high in B vitamins, as well as giving you a chocolate substitute.
Well, carob has never quite done it for me. I have a great addiction to chocolate, but probably this goes back to what we talked about earlier, that if you basically have a good diet, it's not going to hurt once in a while to treat yourself.
That's right. I think to get treats back in treat category is really, really an important thing, because in our lives today, we could have chocolate every day,
yes,
all day long. So where's the treat?
Mm-hmm. And it does taste better, I found, when I don't have it for about 3 weeks.
And if you're going to treat yourself, have something really good. Have something that's worth it. Go out and buy a wonderful, expensive chocolate and sit in a lovely little shop with some cappuccino and really enjoy it. Don't just go to the quick sale rack at the supermarket and buy some sandwich cookies that have been slashed open. Why bother?
So this kind of works hand in hand with a holistic life, where we sort of slow down and pay attention to our life too, not only to what we cook and put into our bodies, but pay attention to the present moment.
That's right. The last section of Get the Fat Out is called Get the Fat Off Your Body and Out of Your Life, because to really live in a low-fat way, we want to get active, we want to walk a little bit, be out there in the world and really treating ourselves well.
I think that's an important concept, that we don't want to just totally focus on this idea of getting the fat out of our food, but all the peripheral stuff that kind of fits into a healthy program.
Right. I think most of us have a lot of fat between our ears. That's probably the most important place to get it out of to start with. There's so many habits that we hang on to just because we don't know a better way. So here are 501 good ways.
Enough to keep us happy, I think, for a long time, and enough to give us food for thought as well as food for the body.
Thank you.
I thank you very much for being with us. I hope you continue to write fun, exciting books for us to use.
Thanks a lot.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.